I like the idea of supralapsarianism.
What?
I love supralapsarianism.
It's a great word, isn't it, though? It's just, yeah. Are we back? Are we alive? Okay.
All right.
Even in Technicolor.
And now no one will understand why we're talking about supralapsarianism.
They won't. We'll just be like the mystery episode that we lost on on the podcast. Just, yeah. All right. So, yeah. Hi, Dan.
Hi, Dave.
So, what do we got today?
Well, in addition to supralapsarianism, which we're going to work into the conversation as many times as possible,
Yeah.
we're going to round out our Easter topic, basically.
Yes, because today is Easter 7.
Yeah. And so this ends it. And even if I have extra questions, they're just going to have to wait till next year.
Always comes around every year it comes back. So
I'll just save them if need be. I do have a working computer today, so I should be able to see your comments when they come in. But let's just start with taking it over. We had we left off with threes.
Okay.
And how the number 3 was playing into Holy Week so much.
Yep.
So today, we're going to finally get beyond that.
Yes.
And start getting into some of the practicality of Holy Week.
Okay.
You know, there's so many things, I think, that we gloss over in the Bible just because it's like holy and we turn off critical thinking.
Yeah.
And I think that's why a lot of people don't even see a lot of the inconsistencies that are there.
Yeah.
With this, it's more a question of practicality. If Jesus was so notorious,
Yeah.
why did the priests and Sanhedrin need Judas to point him out? You know, Jesus even points out that, you know, I've been up in the temple all this time. I've been teaching. I've been right in front of your noses all this time.
Right.
So given that, why did they need Judas to point him out?
Well, so first you got to remember, yes, he says I've been there but he's been there all week, right? This takes place over like 7 days, right? You know, so like before this, Jesus has only irregularly been in Jerusalem, you know, and you got to, the key to understanding this is you got to understand that the crew Jesus has been arguing with out in Galilee and the surrounding territories is not the same people he's arguing with when he enters Jerusalem, right? It's the difference between the Pharisees and the chief priests, right? You know, so it's a different party. So like they actually, he's been in the temple all week, but like other than that, they've probably not really encountered him all that much. You know, he's this rumor, you know, and there's no Facebook pages, you know, to like identify him, right? You know, and so all that tells us is that Jesus is incredibly average looking, right? You know, he looks like the normal first century Jew, you know, and there'd be nothing much to stick him out in a crowd, you know, and so they know that there's this guy, they've encountered him in the last week, but like, you know, would the temple police be able to pick him out? Like, no, you know, it's the temple guard that come to arrest him, right? So like, would they be able to pick him out in a crowd? Like, not really, you know. So
I guess that gets into one of our misconceptions. You know, especially in the U.S., we've got that whole, you know, blonde, blue-eyed Jesus. Which obviously would have stuck out like a sore thumb back then. So I guess that further reinforces the fact that he would have had dark, curly hair, olive skin, brown eyes. He
probably looks more like a Palestinian today than he does kind of anything else.
Yeah.
You know, just reality, right? You know, he probably looks like a Palestinian more than he looks like anything else.
So why did we start envisioning him as like this Nordic Jesus? Does that, again, have more to do with Renaissance painters?
I mean, each culture depicts, I think this is mostly a fact that we in the United States don't get outside.
We don't get out much.
Right. Like we don't get outside the U.S. very often, you know, and so like if you go to church in China, you know, Jesus looks Chinese, right? You know, like if you go to church in, you know, Europe, and even Eastern Europe, right? Like icons of Jesus look different than our Nordic Jesus, right? You know, in iconography, you know, and so again, in Africa, he will look You know, there's a great icon called Jesus the Liberator, but it's Jesus painted as a Maasai warrior, you know, from the Maasai tribe in Africa. You know, like, so every culture does this. We all, you know, see Jesus reflected in us, you know, and there's not a problem with that. It's just that we don't get out much, and so we don't, you know, when was the last time you went to church and, you know, went to church in China or went to church in Constantinople? You know, like, the iconography of Jesus would look different there, you know.
Well, even Mexico. I mean,
Right, Mexico, you know, right.
amazing churches and the church decor I just love.
Right, you know, and it all looks different, you know, and
Yeah.
that's okay, right? And that's because there's a universal aspect to Jesus, right? Where all humanity is encompassed in him.
Well, stretching out to the others too. You know, we always picture Jesus and the apostles in these nice long robes, multi-layered.
Yeah.
And you would have had to have been fairly rich to afford that back then, it seems like, you know, and they're hard to move in.
Yeah.
And I just saw a museum selection of clothing
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
2 millennia ago. And even how we envision Mary,
Right.
incredibly off base from
Right.
how women dressed in
Yeah.
the Mideast back then.
Yeah.
And I don't know, sometimes I wonder if our day-to-day theology would be a little more on target if we envisioned
Yeah.
Mary and Jesus and Joseph and the disciples the way they really appeared, as opposed to having them force them into our image.
Yeah, I mean, there's a balancing act there, right? You know, there's an artistic license, you know, of, you know, when Renaissance painters would love, like, or middle-aged painters would love to paint, like, stories about, like, David get in battle, like, but he's dressed up as a medieval knight, you know,
Yeah.
like, like, you know, I mean, the anachronism of it all is part of the, is part of the artistic license that's happening there.
Yeah.
You know, so I think we should acknowledge that, right? Like, there is just, it's a work of art, right? It's not meant to be scriptural.
Yeah.
You know, so it is what it is, you know. Right, it is what it is, to be endured.
Endure we shall.
Right.
In that same sequence where Judas comes into the garden, kisses Jesus to show the guards who he is,
Right.
there's the line about the young man in a linen cloth.
Yes.
And that,
In Mark's gospel.
yes, and it seems to come out of nowhere.
It does.
You know, here's, the guards are coming, they're going to take you away, you know, lop off somebody's ear with a sword, this, that, the other.
Yeah.
And here's a kid in a linen cloth.
Right.
Is there significance to that? Is there a reason that just comes out of the blue?
Other than it's kind of foreshadowing how everybody will run away, right? You know, I mean, it's this foreshadowing of how everybody deserts Jesus. Other than that, we don't really know what it's about. You know, some people think that's Mark himself. You know, that's Mark's self-insert into the piece of the story.
And almost a mea culpa. It's like, hey, I could have stuck by, but I was the first one to run.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a mea culpa, but it's right. I was the first one to run, you know, or just, hey, I was there. This is me, you know.
So he's photobombing the scene.
Right, photobombing the arrest. You know, and so it's like, it's hard to know, you know. Mark doesn't tell us what his deal is.
And just for clarity, is Mark's the one that hung out with Peter as Peter?
Yeah, so this is his name. His full name is John Mark. He is. He's mentioned a couple times in various places in the New Testament. His short biography is that his mother appears to have been Christian first and then converted. He converted through his mom, like many good and faithful people.
Yeah.
He starts off as one of Paul's traveling companions, but he's really young. And he can't quite make the cut on the first missionary journey. and there's some controversy with Paul and the guy he's traveling with over whether they take him or send him back, basically. And so Paul and the guy he's traveling with, Barnabas, split up shortly after they tell Mark, go home. It seems to have been Mark was the central. Was he old enough to make the trip or not?
Yeah.
Or did he have enough endurance as a fairly inexperienced, very young man to make the trip? And then he hangs out with Barnabas, and then from there, he still kind of works with Paul occasionally, and he becomes Peter's. Tradition has it he becomes Peter's translator in Rome. And then that's kind of where the Gospel of Mark gets mostly sourced from, is Peter telling his angle on the story. And then from there he goes to Alexandria, where it becomes, to this day, it's the Coptic Orthodox Pope is Pope of St. Mark's Cathedral. He's Bishop of St. Mark's Cathedral in Alexandria.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
That's his short biography.
So does that imply that Mark's gospel is the closest we have to a gospel from an actual apostle, one of the actual original 12?
I mean, Matthew is supposedly like Matthew the tax collector, right? So he actually is one of the 12, as is John's, depending on how you feel about that, right? So both of those are technically closer. Mark's is one step removed, and that's tradition. Nowhere does Mark say, I'm sitting down with Peter. And, he doesn't give us Luke's little intro, right?
Yeah.
And so he doesn't actually say that, so make of that what you will.
Okay. That's hard. So much ambiguity.
Well, I mean, it all depends on, we get, the tradition mainly comes from two guys. One is named Eusebius and one is named Papias, who are both kind of the first two historians of the church, Eusebius is in about the 250s, or no, Papias is in about the 250s. Eusebius is in about the 300s. He's Constantine's church historian,
today's the anniversary of Constantinople being dedicated to Constantine,
right.
by the way.
So see, so if, whenever I say church tradition, I'm either talking about something the early church fathers said or something Eusebius or Papias wrote us,
Yeah.
And whether you trust them or not.
Yeah, they're still a couple centuries removed from the source.
They are, although they're not nearly as removed, right?
Yes, we are. So.
And I tend to think people don't invent tradition out of whole cloth, which is why my strategy is always innocent until proven guilty. Unless there's proof that it's wrong, I'll lean towards tradition.
That's all we have to rely on.
Right. But unless you're telling me something actually in scripture or archaeological evidence, I'll kind of be like, why not? Yeah. So
that works.
Yep.
So getting back to the scene, when they bring him in and they're having their overnight questioning of him, the high priest tears his clothes when Jesus finally does speak. We talked last week about the fact that Jesus stays quiet through so much of this. And that just gets me back to that time period. People don't rend their clothes today. What was the big deal about people tearing their clothes throughout the Old Testament and the New?
Yeah.
It was.
It's as public. We don't do public. We are an interior society, right? So we tell kids, right? Nobody can define. We say this to kids all the time, right? Especially when they're being bullied or something. Nobody can tell you who you are, right? And in the ancient world, because it's an honor-shame society, that advice is reversed. Everybody tells you who you are, and so
So you are defined by the people around you.
Yeah, you're defined by, your reputation and the people around you, and so whereas we don't really we don't think of these great public shows. We think of them as silly, but for them, right, in that scene, from the high priest perspective, right, Jesus, the high priest asks, "Are you the Son of God?" And Jesus goes, I am he, right? Which is in Greek, ego eimi, right? Which is also the Greek translation of Yahweh.
Ah.
And so the priest is rending his clothes because Jesus has just uttered this name nobody else has ever allowed. You're not actually supposed to utter Yahweh, So Jesus has just uttered the name, the tetragrammaton, we call it, the 4 letters. He's uttered the name of God, which you're never supposed to utter. And so that's why he's rending his clothes, but it's because it's public blasphemy, right? It's so you have to have this public show of, of responding to it.
So technically, since it seems like we only have one name for God. It's just God with a capital G in our culture. So are we technically committing blasphemy by saying God?
You will find, especially in like Christian-Jewish relations, sometimes we will strike the G we'll strike the O, and like when we write God, there'll be a dash where the O is supposed to be. That's supposed to be a kind of subtle play towards the way Yahweh is. I would say no to answer it. The simple answer to your question is I don't think so. I think this is the advantage of being Christian. No, The complicated answer is, in Hebrew, God's name is 4 letters. It's YHWH, right? We don't actually know how it's pronounced because they were never supposed to utter it. And in fact, they put purposefully the wrong vowels. Vowels in Hebrew are little dots under the letters, and so they purposefully, it's called vowel marking, so they mismarked the vowels. Intentionally. And they marked the vowels as the vowels for another word, which is Adonai, which translated means Lord, right? And that was supposed to be your visual cue that you're not supposed to say Yahweh, you're supposed to say Adonai every time you hit YHWH, which is why in your Bibles, in the Old Testament especially, it says Lord all the time. Oh Lord my God. Whenever it says that, that's actually the name of God that's there. It's Yahweh our God, or however you would pronounce the letters, And so, to bring this up to your question, if you want to do this right, in Christian-Jewish relations, every time you come across God, just say Lord, is the simple way to solve that problem.
Wow, okay.
And you can tell that in your Bibles because in your Old Testaments especially, it'll be in all little capital letters, right? Lord will be all little capital letters.
Yeah.
And that's to tell you you've hit the name of God. You're not supposed to say Yahweh, you're supposed to say Adonai every time you hit it.
Okay.
Because only the high priest in the temple on the Day of Atonement can utter God's name.
So it could be uttered then, so that's how people knew how it should have been pronounced?
That's the one time it was ever uttered, was in the Holy of Holies, on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur,
How did we lose the pronunciation?
Well, they never wrote it down. They never told us, they never told you what the right way was.
Yeah.
So when the high priest got by the Romans, there's no high priest, there's no Yom Kippur ceremony in the temple in Jerusalem anymore. So
there's no one to hear it, and there's no one to...
Right.
Wow.
And they never wrote it down because it was blasphemy to even write it properly.
Yeah.
So we've got these 4 consonants with all the wrong vowels, So
it's kind of an educated guess, the way we pronounce it.
Yeah, we've made a guess. The best guess is something like Yahweh, which both imitates breathing, right? Yahweh, and it's it's a play off the verb to be, which is why when Moses asks him, "Who are you?" God's response is, "I am that I am," right?
Yeah.
It's a verb. It's a play off the word is, off the verb is.
Yeah. It always made me think of Popeye, though, when I read that part.
Yeah, right. I am that I am. I am what I am.
I am what I am, and that's all that I am.
Right.
But
it could be something like, I will be what I will be,
que sera, sera.
Right. I was what I was, like, it's hard to know what the actual translation is. Because we don't have the word. So.
Yeah. To me, what I like, and maybe I'm thinking in sci-fi terms, but to say your name is simply I am that I am, does carry that connotation of heaviness of, originally I was the only one, I was the only thing, I was the only...
Yeah.
So, you don't need a name if you're all that is.
Right. That God's name is not, right, that God is not defined by... Greek philosophers made a lot of this when they got a hold of Judaism, but right, that God is not defined by anything other than pure existence.
Yeah.
Right. And I would, right, that God exists, and is existence itself,
So it doesn't need a name.
Right.
I love that.
Right. Or just, I don't have to have an identifier beyond, I'm the one that is. I'm the one that exists. So I am what I am. So
I'm processing that again. Every time I hear it, I process it.
Yeah.
Okay, with Rome in Jerusalem, keep bouncing back.
Yeah.
But with Rome in Jerusalem at that time.
Yes.
And all the various religious beliefs that would bring with it.
Yep.
Why would Jesus' blasphemy be punishable by death? Why wasn't everybody who didn't follow?
They have this problem in that it's not technically qualified by death, right? So the Jewish leaders have this problem. They want him dead. They don't actually have a way to execute him, right? It's just not... Crucifixion is not how Jews executed people. It was by stoning. Furthermore, this isn't a stoning, right? They have this technical problem that they want him dead, but they can't quite. There's no legal recourse in order to do that, So they got to get Rome involved, which is why Rome is involved,
That's why the bringing back and forth to Herod, then Pilate.
Because they're arguing over jurisdiction, right? And Rome doesn't actually really want this, or Pilate's kind of rolling his eyes at this the whole time. Pilate's dismissive of it, and Herod doesn't really want it either, First, so they go to Rome, and his charge isn't blasphemy with Rome; it's sedition. Right, that's the I am the king of the Jews. That's why they put that there, right? It's treason and sedition is his charge, and general troublemaking, And then basically Pilate sends him to Herod because he says, hey, this isn't in my court. He's a Galilean. I'm not actually in charge of Galilee. That's not my jurisdiction. I'm sending you to Herod, who is what's called Tetrarch of Galilee.
Ah, okay. So Pilate, from a legit boundary standpoint.
Pilate's got the Judea, Jerusalem area under his authority.
Okay.
Lower Israel, and then...
And Herod has northern Israel.
Right. And then Herod the Great had authority over it all. Right. Okay. He was client king for Rome. He had authority over all of it. No, not even... The Romans weren't there yet. He ruled it all. He ruled it all in the name of Rome, right? He dies. He has like 4 kids, right? And so they split the kingdom in 5 ways. Lower Israel, Judea, with Jerusalem, the biggest city, goes toward. It's ruled by Rome. Directly becomes a Roman province. And then various other parts are divided among his kids, and they're all called tetrarchs because there's 4 of them. And because the Romans, they wanted the title of king, but the Romans didn't want to give them formally the title of king because that came with it legal things that they didn't like, And
Rome was big on law.
Right. So the title they get is Tetrarch, and so Herod is Tetrarch of Galilee, That's what the portion of the kingdom he's gotten from his father. And so that's why Pilate goes, go back to Herod, you're Galilean, you're from Nazareth. You're not actually from my boundaries anyway. I don't want this paperwork on my desk. Go away. Herod then says, meh, I don't really want him either. And plus the thing he's being charged for happened in Jerusalem, not in Galilee, so why are you sending him to me? Kill him if you want, but it didn't happen in my territory, and so he sends him back to Pilate. And then Pilate says, fine, I'll deal with it.
It's all legal wrangling going on.
Yeah, it's like court cases arguing over, venue and jurisdiction and stuff like that, right?
So that's legit. I mean, it's not like passing the buck. This is the bureaucracy in action.
It is, in a way, it's passing the buck, but it's passing the buck bureaucratically, right?
Yeah.
It's them trying to decide. Neither one of them really want to deal with this, right? They're kind of rolling their eyes at the whole thing, and so it's like, I don't really want to deal with this. Send it back to Herod. Herod doesn't want to deal with it. Send it back to Pilate.
Yeah.
Pilate's like, fine, I'll kill you, whatever.
Well, we're at our end of our time.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a whole nother page of questions. So we're off to a good start for next year.
We're off to a good start for next year.
So one final question then on this. Pilate crucified. He was like the crucifixion king of ancient Rome.
Yeah.
And in fact, I think you've said before that even Rome was like, dude, you pull back here.
He gets removed by Tiberius for being too cruel, which is quite one that Tiberius does. Tiberius is not a nice guy.
To begin with.
Right, to begin with. Tiberius is responsible for the line, the goal is to shear the sheep, not skin them.
I like that.
That's a great line. And so, yeah. It's rare for a governor to get removed for being too cruel.
But that's what happens to Pilate.
Right, that's what happens to Pilate.
Well, given the volume then of cases he would hear, not the least of which being the crucifixion cases, would he actually have had a trial? It seems back then it would have taken way too much time for a man who thought he was that busy. Wouldn't it have just been like the paper come across his desk, he asks a couple questions, and then
No, the Romans are lawyers, so you got to do it right.
Okay.
So there would have been a trial. That's mostly what he's there for. That's actually most of his.
He's there to adjudicate.
Right.
Mostly.
Okay. Yeah. Right. The chief executive is also the chief judicator. Is the chief judge in Roman law. Right. This is actually most of what the emperors did too. They actually heard cases.
Wow. So even the emperors.
Right.
Wow.
They're this quasi-military judge. They're this combination of like Supreme Court justice, military general, that get merged into this one role. But right, even the emperors are supposed to, the ones who are doing it right, be hearing cases. This is executives in ancient Rome. This is their primary task. So if he's not doing it, it's kind of like, well, what else are you doing, man? Now Pilate doesn't treat it very seriously, right? Like he's clearly mocking Jesus. The tone Pilate is taking is mocking Jesus the entire time, right? He's not like, this is not Jesus Christ superstars. He's kind of curious, sympathetic, right? He's mocking Jesus. So he's not taking it very seriously. It's a show trial. And he's mocking Jesus and mocking the Jewish leaders.
At the same time. He's doing this for fun, right? But so given that he doesn't really see this as a real capital offense, I would assume.
He kind of. I think he sees it as potentially a problem, and why not kill potential problems? Is
nip it in the bud.
Yeah, it's what's another dead Jew is kind of Pilate's attitude. Let's just kill him.
So he had like Roman hubris and saw non-Romans as kind of less than human?
I don't know if it was like a non-Roman thing or it was just the people he ruled thing,
He just had disdain for being in the backwater part of the empire.
Yeah, he's in... if you think about it, right, like Pilate has all the all the arrogance of high nobility, with all of the inferiority complex of not being in the top tier, right? You know, which is like a really deadly combination for people, you know, and so, like, the province he's sent to is for lesser nobility, you know, like that's what's, Roman provinces were ranked, you know, and it was in the second tier, the lower tier, you know, so it was for lesser nobility. So he has all this arrogance of like a Roman nobility, but all the inferiority complex of, I'm not governor of Syria, you know, I'm governor of Palestine, you know, like, you know, governor of Judea, like, you know, like, yeah.
So is this kind of a case of him taking that out on the people he governs?
Yeah, kind of, you know, and he views them dismissively, you know. And Roman governors tended to treat their provinces as like personal piggy banks anyway, you know, they kind of saw it as like the job in the governorship in the provinces was their reward for their long service to the empire, and so they'd, you know, he's like, I'll just milk them for all they're worth, you know, because this is my payback for all the investment I made serving the empire.
Yeah.
You know.
I just, with my day job, working with a leadership company,
it's not a...
I'm thinking this is not a good leader.
Well, it's not a sustainable system, right?
No.
So you know, gradually over the course of the empire, the emperors try and change this, you know, and try and resolve the issue, you know. And so they make various reforms until very late. Diocletian's answer is senators just aren't allowed to have roles in government anymore. You know, and kind of like Star Wars, the Senate, you know, the Imperial Senate has been disbanded. The regional governors will now have direct control. You know, he's like, I'm just forbidding senators from having roles in government jobs ever. You know, they're utterly forbidden.
So Diocletian wasn't known to carry a red lightsaber, was he?
He could have. He would have qualified.
And on that note, until next Easter.
Yeah, until next Easter.
We end our look at the ancient world in Holy Week through those eyes.
Yep.
So, thank you.
Next week's Pentecost, wear your red.
I'll have to remember that.
Yep.
I don't know what button I'll have, but I'll...
Pentecost, fire. See you all later.
All right. Thanks, everybody.